And we're back. So today we're in El Nido for the biggest global media launch bike event in Philippine history. And yes, we're with the most highly anticipated bike to come out of the ADV segment. And CFMOTO is treating us local and international guests from all over the world to all come here in Palawan and experience the all-new 450. So there you go again, the 450 MT by CFMOTO. And if you haven't seen my previous video about the walkthrough of this bike, please watch that video first, because for this we'll be going through mostly about its riding dynamics, because CFMOTO prepared the complete package here, so they're giving us road and off-road experiences. So if you're curious about how this bike rides, stay tuned because we'll be going through everything plus more on this video. And also special thanks to Motor Market and Senna. Link in the description below if you want to get the same gear that I'm wearing today. Okay, so before we go through the riding experience, let's first talk about the pros about this bike. So first things first, we have a 21-inch spoke tubeless rims. We also have a twin-cylinder 270-degree crank. We also have a dual stack headlights, one-hand operation windscreen, a foldable ADV side mirrors. We also have trellis frames, aluminum swing arm, KYB adjustable rear and front shocks. But I think the most important feature for this is a single-touch ABS on and off function, which I will talk about more in depth later. But yeah, other than that, for the price that it comes with, I don't think you can get a better ADV package than this one. It may be missing a few features that I would want, but the fact that this bike is priced at this level, we don't really have the right to complain about it. But anyway, now let's get on to riding the bike. Alright, so first things first, I'm 66 kilograms and 175 centimeters in height. And personally for me, I can flat foot the bike at its seat height of 800 to 820 millimeters. However, I did opt for the comfort seat that raises the seat height up to 870 millimeters. And even at that height, I could still kind of flat foot the bike because it's slimmer on the top, kind of like an enduro seat. So in a way, this bike also caters for taller individuals. But this seat has got to be the comfiest seat I've ever used on any bike. So I highly suggest you try this seat first if you're above 170 centimeters. But first, let's address the issue about its weight. On paper, it's declared as 175 kilograms dry and 192 kilograms wet. That is with all the engine oil and the fuel tank filled to the brim. So that's 17.5 liters in fuel. I think the largest in its class, but even with the full tank, I've had no problems lifting the bike up alone. But if you compare it to other mid-size ADV bikes, there probably won't be that much difference on its declared dry weight. And I know it doesn't make sense, but give it a chance because you really have to try this bike in person to understand why we consider this relatively light thanks to its great weight distribution. So yes, this is still lighter than the single cylinders in its class, which is already impressive on its own considering this has a heavier twin cylinder with twice the engine components like cylinders and pistons. More power, more torque, but for some reasons, this thing is still magically lighter than those. And it doesn't compromise on anything because it's a proper ADV with adjustable KYB front and rear shocks, as well as the 21-inch spoke tubeless rims. So technically, it kinda slots in between the single-cylinder 400cc adventure bikes and the heavier and pricier twin-cylinder adventure bikes. And even though it's only marginally lighter than the more premium and bigger adventure bikes, well, at least on paper, you also really have to consider that this is almost half the price, even though they're equally capable. At the end of the day, if you're still complaining about its weight, then I guess you're better off getting an enduro or a rally bike because there's really nothing to complain about when there's no other bike like this at its price point. As for the off-road features, many of the 450 MT's features are considered aftermarket parts that you would still need to buy if you choose to go with other bike brands, aside for maybe the optional crash guards that this demo bike came pre-installed with. But other than that, I feel like CFMOTO has already thought of everything when it comes to road and off-road riding. We have belly pan, one-hand adjustable fly screen, luggage rack, and we also have rally-inspired dual-stack projector headlights, which surprisingly I think is the most defined headlight I've ever used, and this is perfect for off-roading at night. We also have foldable adventure mirrors, foldable brake and shifting pedals so you don't snap them when you drop them off-road, as well as removable rubber pegs for your footrest. And not to mention, it also has an adjustable up and down shifter pedal for when you use your MX boots. But hands down, my favorite standout feature for this bike is definitely the one touch off for the ABS and traction control that you can toggle at any speed or gear. And the best part is it keeps it safe even if you accidentally kill your bike mid off-road. Do note that the button only turns off the ABS in the rear, so you still have ABS in front, which I think is important even for off-road use. It literally takes me 2 to 3 seconds to disable traction in ABS before I go to off-road trails, and then quickly turning it on again before I enter the road segment during our trip here in Palawan. I also like the fact that they gave us 21-inch tubeless rim spokes, which is unheard of for this segment. You really only get this from higher, more premium bikes. The 21-inch rims absorb most of the humps while keeping it light up front. Surprisingly, even with the CST tires that kind of look like the Pirelli Scorpions, I was genuinely surprised at how far I could counterlean the bike down on road. If it was a better rider, I'm sure they could lean this all the way down even more. But after riding this for a few kilometers, I'd say the rubber stock tires are more than good enough for daily riding and some fire roads. Tech-wise, I'd say it's well equipped. We have a 5-inch TFT display that is made out of tempered glass, hence why the dust and droplets just beads off of it, and this is not something you'd see even on more premium bikes. But other than that, the menu and the graphics are pretty straightforward and easy to understand. You also have your typical phone pairing, but sadly, no cruise control, quick shifter, steering dampener. But then again, for the price that this bike retails at, that's already asking too much. Not to mention, we still have a ride-by cable, hence the absence of riding modes. But if you think about it, you do have riding modes in the form of off-road mode with ABS rear and traction control off. But since this is still a cable throttle, there won't be any throttle response differences. As for the TFT, I just really wish that CFMOTO made this into a portrait style display, but at least CFMOTO was kind enough to place provision for a GPS/phone mount, as well as a conveniently placed USB-C charging point near the TFT. Okay, so looks-wise, I feel like CFMOTO nailed the modern ADV style. It looks big enough in person that it looks kinda like a 700, and I think it's because of this really wide gas tank, which kinda makes it look like a big adventure bike. As for the variants, there are only 2 colors to choose from, each with their own low and high fender mudguards. Personally for me, I prefer the low fender because when I tried the high fender, it threw a reasonable amount of water towards me, and I'm guessing it's gonna catch a lot of high wind on the expressways too. And with the bike being so light, it might affect the handling conditions. Also, the high fender looks a little bit too awkward because the front suspension is not tall and wide enough. And I know they say the high fender is great for mud riding, but realistically, how many times would you get stuck in mud in a year versus riding it comfortably on roads and puddles? But at the end of the day, it really just boils down to the looks and preferences. I feel like a choice would have been easier made if CFMOTO included the optional crash guards with the high fender. Engine-wise, I think the 450cc engine is CFMOTO's bread and butter. This engine is so successful that they used it in 4 totally different variants, which I think will result in increased parts availability. So in theory, if you're trying to look for faults about this engine, you can try and do a little bit more research about the NK and SR engines, if there are any. It's one of the best sounding stock 270-degree crank 450cc engine that is very linear, smooth and responsive. Not to mention, it is one of the easiest engines to shift and find neutral. I never really missed a gear while riding this bike. It exerts almost zero heat when we rode it the whole day in El Nido. Definitely a well-balanced engine for road and off-road use, even though this one has a different engine tune and a bigger sprocket for more low-end torque compared to the NK and SR. Power-wise, I think it's more than enough power for most average riders, especially for off-road. And I'd say comfortable cruising speed at highway is give or take around 130 kilometers per hour. As for top speed, I've seen international vloggers maxing this out at more or less 170 kilometers per hour. Clearly a bike fit for the Philippine roads, not too big to daily in the city, capable on the highways, and just the right size for back roads. So we basically rode this bike for almost a whole day with a good mix of twisties and fire roads, and then ended it with a technical course up a sandy mountain track. But during this uphill climbs, I would say I was mostly on second or third gear. The first gear at times sometimes felt too short or a little too torquey, especially when I'm doing sandy or uphill climbs. And personally, based on my height, the tank's width fits my legs perfectly. I've had no problem sitting nor standing up on it for long periods of time. I think the extremely large and wide gas tank in a way kinda helped me feel more planted with the bike. Not to mention the tank is perfect for adventure touring, since realistically you don't always have to fill it full when riding off-road. So in a way, it's sort of like a jack of all trades, good on on-road and off-road. As for the front single disc brake, It's a little less responsive compared to the rear, possibly because it's a front-heavy bike with a single disc brake 21-inch rim, but I'd say it's good enough for my weight. Although I can't say the same for heavier riders like the European reviewers, but the rear is really responsive, hence it was super easy for us to purposely slide and play with the rear tire once the ABS and traction control is off. Suspension wise, I never really adjusted it when I first got it. Even though the front and rear are preload, compression, and rebound adjustable, I mean, it never really bothered me anyway. But then again, just a quick disclaimer, I'm no pro rider, but when me and my friends tried this bike, for a moment we felt like pros. We were swinging the rear tire left and right, and I was even speeding on loose trails that I otherwise wouldn't even attempt on my personal bike. And I really think it has something to do with the bike's weight and height that builds up the rider's confidence. You don't have that constant fear of dropping the bike because it's too tall or too heavy. It's as if the bike is almost impossible to drop, even when it's so close to falling to the ground. And if you were to give me this bike and a bigger, more capable bike on the same off-road course, I would probably be faster on the 450 MT despite its smaller displacement, simply because of how easy and how comfortable I am that I won't drop or lose control on this bike. As for the build quality, I'd say fit and finish is on the same level as the Japanese and European bikes in its category. It certainly doesn't feel cheap even at this price point, and I'm sure if you put a Japanese badge on it, the price would increase by the thousands. But then again, the Japanese would probably never build a bike like this, so props to CFMOTO for actually delivering the bike that we all have been waiting for. For a first gen, this is clearly a step in the right direction. They really put a lot of thought even on the small details that are often overlooked, like easy access air filters, down to that forged carbon black plastic which makes the bike look and feel premium. Not to mention, this 450 MT uses the same steel and construction used to make the trellis frames on KTM motorcycle frames. And if your issue is still that it's a China bike, do note that CFMOTO manufactures and shares some parts with KTM because they build most of the KTM 790 bikes as well as some of Yamaha's smaller engines in China. As for reliability, only time will tell, but then again, like I said, you only have to look at the NK, SR, and CLC for engine issues, if there are any. So overall, by no means this is not just a beginner bike, but it's a good bike even for experienced riders. It was never meant to replace the middleweight ADVs because it's a class on its own, designed to give us more options. I have friends who have Desert X's and Teneres wanting to get this bike as their second bike, specifically just for off-road because it's more fun to play with. But for me, I feel like this is the bike to get if you're getting your very first ADV, but also the bike to get if you're tired of your bigger ADV, especially for us who aren't as good as the pros because we will never really come close to using the true potential of those expensive middleweight ADVs. I've said it before and I'll say it again, I feel like the 450 twin engine is where CFMOTO really shines, and to think that this is their first lightweight off-road ADV is already impressive on its own. So if you want a capable no-frills ADV bike that's affordable and has all the features that you'd ever need, then you can never really go wrong with this bike. And I know you've probably noticed it's been really hard for me to find faults on this motorcycle, especially because its feature set far exceeds its price point. But at the end of the day, it's easy to bash a Chinese bike, but trust me, you really have to try it and see for yourself or you'll be missing out. Regardless, Chinese or not, this bike is going to be a sales hit. People said the same about the Royal Enfield before because it was Indian, and then it proved itself better than the Japanese competition. Truth is, CFMOTO listened to us when no one would, and they more than delivered. For some, it may not be the unicorn bike that they've been looking for, but this is the closest that we've got that's actually for sale right now. And for Filipinos, this might just be the new pambansang ADV. But anyway, congrats to CFMOTO for a successful launch. They didn't have to, but they went above and beyond for promoting the bike and the Philippines. Also, thanks to Motor Market and Senna for providing and equipping me with all the gear that I'm wearing. A separate review will be coming up soon, so don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, so there you go, the 450 MT by CFMOTO. And if you still don't believe me at this point, you really have to try it to believe it. But to sum it up, I guess all I can say is that whenever I'm riding this bike, I feel like a pro, even though I'm not. I mean, that's just how good the bike feels. I feel comfortable riding it on and off-road. I'm not always second guessing, or I'm not always conscious about its weight. I just enjoy how it rides. As cliche as it sounds, I just feel one with the bike. I was never really bothered by its weight, by its height, fuel consumption, engine heat, the lightness of the clutch, how easy it is to shift and find neutral. So I genuinely think that CFMOTO really thought of everything about this bike already. It may not be a perfect bike, it may not even be the lightest or the fastest bike, but after riding for a full day, this is definitely the most fun bike I've ever had off-road.